Hey guys, it's Sasha. The UK economy is in a dire state and it needs urgent change. The previous government and the current government have both failed the British people. In the 6 years since 2019, the UK economy has grown by 2.9% in total. That's 0% per year if you round it to the nearest 0.5%. Since 2007, on key metrics like growth in GDP and growth in wages, the UK has fallen far, far behind countries like the United States. The UK needs an urgent and drastic change in direction. The UK needs actual growth, not just the Prime Minister and the Chancellor repeating the word growth over and over, hoping that it happens by magic. The last budget increased taxes, sent businesses into panic mode, has started an employment problem and stifled investment in the UK. Rachel Reeves is now seeing that growth is not happening just because she repeated the word growth for 6 months in a row. So now she is out of ideas and she's busy cutting spending instead. So seeing as the government doesn't seem to have any ideas on how to actually get the economy going, I put together this emergency budget. If you are in the UK government, and if you are Rachel Reeves or Keir Starmer or whoever else watching this, please feel free to take all of these ideas and implement them, and you are free to claim that you came up with them all by yourself and take complete credit. I don't care. If you are in opposition, any party, I don't care, and you want some ideas on what to do after you kick Labour out at the next election, feel free to take any of this on board as well. You can't cut your way to prosperity, and you cannot tax your way to growth either. So let's get going. There is a lot to get through, but it's all very important. Now, this is actually a fully costed budget. This means that there will be some things that you do probably like the sound of, but there will be other things, I guarantee you, that you maybe do not like the sound of. Because the government does have to raise revenue while also making serious growth happen at the same time. So hear me out and have a think about how all of this works together as a package. So this is the emergency budget. First, let's talk about taxes. Income tax. Income tax will be combined with national insurance and employer national insurance into a new single tax. The current system is absurdly complex for a reason. There is income tax, there is national insurance, and then there's employers' national insurance. In the end, it is all tax on people's wages, just under different names. There is a total cost of hiring somebody by a company. And there is then the amount of money that ends up being paid into that person's bank account every month. The difference between the two, the difference between how much the person takes home and how much that person costs the business, is the total tax, right? And at the moment, that difference is split into 3 separate things so that it looks like income tax is lower than it is. Currently, the marginal tax rates in the UK go up to 50% from £50,000 and go up to an effective rate of 67% on wages between £100,000 and £125,000. This is if you add income tax, national insurance, and the employer's national insurance together. And the marginal rate goes up to 67% at £100,000 because the personal allowance is tapered away once you cross the £100,000 line. This makes 0 sense. It is disjointed policy. It is dumb. If you earn an average salary of £35,000, then your marginal tax rate is 20%. That's what everyone thinks the tax is. But then you also pay a marginal rate of 8% for national insurance too, which brings the total to 28%. But your employer pays another 15% as of next week in employer's national insurance. If you work that out as a proportion of the total, that includes the employer national insurance because that is the total cost of your employment to your employer, that is a tax rate of 37%. And if you've been to university, then you're paying another 9% on top of that for your student loan, which is basically just another tax. It's the graduate income tax. We call it the student loan in the UK. So if you add the 9% student loan repayments, which most young people do have to pay, you're actually paying a marginal tax rate of 45%. This is a regular person in a regular job on a salary of £35,000 a year. The marginal tax rate is almost half. We need to start being honest with how much we are actually being taxed in the UK. The tax system discourages people to want to earn more money. Between £100,000 and £125,000, you pay 2/3 of every pound you make to the HMRC. So why does somebody want to go and do that? Why would somebody want to take on more work or more hours to hand over almost everything that you make to the government. In the new system, there will just be one income tax, which will replace the 3 separate taxes paid today. The highest level of income tax will be 50% for those earning over £150,000, because I don't think a healthy society should ever be taking the majority of the money that you earn away from you in tax. You should never be paying more than half of what you make to the government, because that discourages ambition. Taxing people most of their income discourages growth. The marginal tax between £10,000 and £50,000 will be 35%, which is actually slightly lower than what it is today. If you add up the 3 separate taxes and work them out as a proportion of the total tax at the moment is 37%. So this means a couple of important things. First, people's wages can now go up because there is no more employers' national insurance. The net pay will be slightly better, and companies don't have to set aside the 15% of your salary before you get paid to pay that employer's national insurance. And second, your tax is now transparent. You are paying just over 1/3 as the total amount of tax, and this tax is slightly lower than what people are actually paying today. So this simplification will essentially be a small tax cut for the majority of working people, and the tax then progressively goes up to 50% as you move up the income brackets. You can see the details in the table on the screen. The setting of devolved taxation will be abolished so that the labour market and the business market between the different countries that form the UK becomes more fluid, so that it is simple, transparent, everyone knows what's what. There will be one central UK-wide income tax. Now, Scotland and Wales by law are allowed to set their own taxes, and they are free to set their own additional tax on top of the federal tax rate if they want to. That is how the devolution system will work. But we need to make the most of our internal single market within the UK for goods, services, and for labour, and we need to simplify the system to make that happen. Next, dividends. The rules on dividends are changing completely. Dividends will be taxed as regular income. Separate tax rates and allowances will be abolished, because the reality is they don't really make much sense today. Dividends are income. They are a form of income, so they really should be taxed as income, and the new income tax setup is now fair. So it'll just flow via the same means. At the moment, many small and medium-sized business owners game the system by paying themselves a tiny minuscule salary, and then the majority comes through as dividends because that reduces the tax burden. And this is not logical, and the two will now merge into the same single income tax setup, so that if you take income from your business, you pay the income tax, whatever method you choose to do it via. Now let's talk about corporation tax, because it is linked to dividends. Corporation tax will now be split into 2 rates: the main rate and the higher rate. The main rate will be reduced from 25% to 15% for companies based in the UK. To be classified as based in the UK, a company has to show significant presence to be eligible for the low corporation tax. The company's actual HQ, not a fake island-style HQ that companies like Google have. The real HQ has to be based in the UK. The company has to have actual employees based here, in the HQ, in offices. The UK HQ has to be the most significant part, the most important, critical part of the overall business, with key executives of the company also permanently being based in that HQ. The majority of the senior leadership of the company have to be UK residents and UK taxpayers to qualify for the lower rate of corporation tax. If this test is not met, then the corporation tax rate will be 25%, the higher rate as it is today. Companies that are already in the UK can benefit immediately. For those who want to change their setup, the transitional arrangement for corporation tax starts this year for companies who want to move their HQ to the UK. The process has to be complete within 2 years to qualify for the transitional arrangement. During transition, the corporation tax rate will drop to 20% from 25% until the company satisfies the UK domicile requirements, at which point corporation tax becomes 15%. Next, pensions. The minimum contribution from payroll to pensions will increase to 5% by the employee, and the employer minimum will also go up to 5%, so that there is a 10% minimum contribution. The employer has to match employee contributions 1-to-1 up to a 10% maximum. Now, this will increase employer costs. This will mean that people have to pay more into their pension, but combined with the elimination of employers' national insurance and other changes in the budget, It is the right thing to do for the long-term benefit of everyone having a good pension. The option to opt out of paying into a private pension will be removed from here. If you are employed, if you pay income tax, however you choose to pay income tax, you have to pay into a private pension scheme as well. And I'm going to explain why. Bear with me. The government pension scheme will be withdrawn completely in 2075, 50 years from now, because as it is right now, the pension system is unsustainable. It cannot work in the longer term. People are having fewer and fewer children. The ratio of people in work to people who are retired is increasing. People are living longer and they will continue to live even longer. The population demographics skew towards more pensioners and less young people paying for those state pensions. And people in work today are financing today's pensioners. The money is not being saved in a magic pot for when you retire. When you pay the national insurance, it doesn't go into a magic place where it waits for you. It just gets paid straight out. If we do not change the system, state pensions are going to completely break the economy as the number of pensioners goes up relative to the number of working people. So everyone in work will build up a private pension scheme that will be compulsory. In 50 years, the state pension system will be retired. Yes, the pun is intended. And this means that everyone entering the workforce today knows about it before it happens. There is plenty of time to adjust. There is no surprises. Private pension schemes will also set up spousal pension contributions for cases where only one person works. The current system of national insurance credits will be replaced by direct contributions to a private pension scheme. And edge cases where people are unable to pay into a private pension scheme will be dealt with via the welfare system. Now, let's talk about inheritance tax. A lot of people have had a lot to say about inheritance tax recently, and on the one hand, it is punitive for the government to tax money that has already been taxed when somebody dies, right? Somebody has worked all their life, saved, and they want to pass things on. On the other hand, society needs to tax wealth at some point to generate the revenue needed to spend on key services. So the inheritance tax will increase to 50%, but it will only be due on assets or asset categories worth over £10,000 individually. If the asset is sold, rented, leased, or in any other way disposed of or monetized within 20 years of the inheritance event. So let me explain. There will be no inheritance tax on heirlooms. There will be no tax on small personal valuables, on those things that remind you of the people who have passed. You can keep the family house and you don't have to sell it because your mum died. If you are a farmer, you can keep the family farm and the antique clock that was in your family for generations. You can keep the family classic car if you actually want to keep it for the long term and if you want to use it and maintain it. If you inherit assets that you want to keep and use, assets that are important to you, then inheritance tax will not apply. But if you do not want to keep the assets, if they are not important to you, and you just want to sell the house to pocket the money, if you are just going to be enriching yourself via this inheritance, well then you just have to pay inheritance tax. And to prevent abuse, the number of houses that can be inherited is limited to 2. And inherited houses and farms and other property cannot be rented or leased out to generate a passive income. This rule includes farms. If you want to lease, rent, or make any indirect revenue from the property you inherit without personally using it, you will have to pay inheritance tax. This way, if you are a farmer and your farmer father dies, you can inherit the farm and you can keep working the fields without having to sell it to a big corporate to pay the tax. If you were left a precious old watch or a precious old car that was important for your family or whatever, you can keep it. But if you are the son of somebody very rich with a portfolio of property, bank accounts with loads of money, businesses and so on, and you just want the cash, well, then yes, you will have to pay 50% inheritance tax. Now, rich people stick their wealth in trusts to avoid having to pay inheritance tax. Only people without an army of lawyers and accountants actually end up paying it. So the 7-year gift rule will be scrapped entirely to prevent this abuse. It is punitive, it is petty, and it is complex. To replace it, anyone is allowed to gift anybody else up to £12,000 a year with no tax implications. You are allowed to gift your immediate family, which is a child, parent, spouse, grandchild, grandparent, and great-grandchild, great-grandparent, immediate family up to £20,000 per year. Any amount over £12,000 or £20,000 will be classified as income by the receiver and is subject to normal income tax via personal assessment. So if you get given £100,000, that's income and you have to pay income tax. Pretty simple, right? Next, VAT. There will be a new structure with 4 tiers. I know this is maybe not quite the simplification I was talking about earlier, but listen up. 4 tiers is more complicated, but here is why. First tier, 0%. This will apply to basic food from supermarkets, things like catering for schools and other similar exempt classes. 0% VAT will also apply to the core services that are necessary to keep the country going and a few special provisions. So 0% VAT will apply to energy, which is currently at 5% VAT. This will also include business energy, by the way, which is currently being taxed at 20% VAT rate. This is stupid. It is a very big part of the reason why the UK has the most expensive business energy costs in the world, and it has to change. It's completely futile. So energy will not have VAT at all because it is a core need for both people and businesses to thrive. 0% will also apply to water supply, to banking, to public transport, to post, to charity activity, disability equipment and services, core health provisions and pharmacies, schools, colleges and universities. The 20% VAT rate for private schools that was recently introduced will be immediately reversed with one exception. It will still apply to foreign students whose parents are not UK tax residents. So if rich people from all over the world want to send their kids to the best schools in the world, to the best universities in the world, whatever, they can pay the 20% VAT for the privilege of doing so. That's an option they can decide. Then there will be a 10% reduced VAT rate. Second tier. This will apply to children's products and clothing, so these will effectively go up slightly because they are currently exempt. And the 10% VAT rate will also apply to amateur sports activities, which are also currently exempt, for cultural admissions, for example, museums, which are also currently exempt, to air and boat transport to outside of the UK, which are for some reason currently exempt, and to things like car and home insurance. The 20% rate will remain the standard VAT rate for most goods and services, as it is at the moment. It will now also include private medical healthcare, which was previously exempt, and 20% VAT will apply to private non-core education and courses. These are also currently exempt. So non-core being online courses or specific training that you choose to take. Things like schools and core education is not VAT eligible. Aircraft repair and maintenance will also stop being exempt. Freight transport in and out of the UK, including containers and transport, apportioned for route, will have VAT on it. Those are all currently exempt. Civil airplane sales to commercial airlines will also have VAT. These are currently exempt. Fees on non-core financial services will also now have VAT. And I know that the banking industry will get out the pitchforks. But VAT will now apply to things like fees for loans, fees for mortgages, fees for financing deals, fees for foreign exchange fees, fees for share dealing, and fees for financial advice, which are all currently exempt. This will raise a significant amount of additional revenue, while also discouraging the charging of fees on financial products, which will actually be a long-term benefit to the consumer. Payment and transaction fees such as card payments and interest payments will continue to be exempt from VAT for obvious reasons. Also, all insurance except car and house insurance, which are on the reduced rate, will now have to pay 20% VAT. Commercial transport insurance is currently exempt. It will stop being exempt so that businesses contribute via paying VAT on it. Complex corporate insurance is no longer exempt, and insurance premium tax will be scrapped because it is now basically the same thing as VAT after these changes, and it will just be replaced by VAT because that is what it is. Another simplification. Next, all betting and gambling sales will now be subject to VAT on the amount of the sale. We have a very serious problem with gambling in the UK. It's a problem that nobody likes to talk about for some reason, and it's a really big issue. Every sports team has a gambling company plastered all over their shirts. Every sports match has gambling ads all around the perimeter of the pitch, all the frickin' time, and in the ad breaks, it's relentless. The number of people who waste their time and money gambling is absurd. It is like unprecedented if you look at other countries in the world. And the problem is as endemic as smoking. And yet nobody's talking about it. The gambling industry has had previous UK governments in their pockets, so nobody wants or chooses to do anything about it. It is bonkers. Gambling adds nothing beneficial to society. All it does is make people like Denise Coates, the CEO of Bet365, insanely rich. Forbes says that she is worth $9.5 billion as of the end of last year, and she earns hundreds of millions of pounds in salary every year. This money is coming right out of the pockets of people who can least afford it. The amount of money that these gambling companies suck out of people is ludicrous, and it is ingrained into kids from an early age. When they get that first football shirt and they put it on and there's a betting company on the front. So now, placing bets, playing gambling games, or buying lottery tickets will also attract a 20% rate of VAT on the amount staked. And advertising for gambling companies will have strict restrictions like we have with tobacco. I know that the gambling industry will be very, very upset because this kind of murders their industry overnight, but it will also mean that a lot of people working in the gambling industry will need to go and find work in an industry that is actually productive for society. And it's worth taking the step to eliminate the parasite that is sucking the money out of the system, sucking money from people who cannot afford to give the money to these companies. The gaming duty and gambling duties will no longer be needed, so they will just be abolished. It's a sledgehammer approach, but the gambling industry disproportionately affects lower paid people, and it stops those people from prospering. Any online gambling sites have to comply or be banned in the UK, and enforcement will be strict. There you go. And then there will now also be a 40% premium VAT rate. This will apply to helicopter sales, for example. These are currently exempt from VAT. So when a super rich guy goes and buys himself a helicopter, he will now have to pay 40% VAT, and there will be obviously an exclusion for government entities such as fire and police services only. 40% tax will also apply to private jet sales, any airplane sales not to a registered commercial airline. And it will apply to private ship repairs and maintenance, such as billionaire yachts. And it will apply to private shipbuilding, all non-commercial ships. The premium VAT rate will also apply to clothing, to bags, and general non-electric goods priced above £1,000. Musical instruments are the exception to this rule. Electronic goods priced above £5,000 will have 40% VAT as well. And cars priced above £100,000 will now also have 40% VAT. And all of these values will be indexed over time to account for inflation and policy changes. And while we're talking about VAT, all providers of digital services of any kind have to subscribe to the UK VAT platform immediately. No exceptions. Currently, big companies like Microsoft, Google, and others are legally registered in places like Ireland, and they do not charge UK VAT on many digital products, including business products. They pretend the transaction is not happening within the UK, and therefore no VAT is due. If you look on the invoices that they print, the Ireland VAT number is on there, and there is no UK VAT charged at all. This has to change, and compliance will be mandatory within 3 months. For too long, these big corporations have been taking the royal piss, and they need to start paying VAT like everybody else, so that a UK company providing a similar service can compete on level playing terms. Next, this one is going to divide opinion. The UK TV license will be abolished. The BBC will now have to operate a subscription service and charge third-party providers like Sky, or they can introduce other monetization like adverts. It's up to them. The TV license is incredibly expensive, and the BBC does not have any competition or any requirement to be efficient with the way that they spend the money, because they are guaranteed this money, which is a form of taxation. There is no option for you not to pay it if you want to watch any form of live TV. It is supporting a monopoly that is fast becoming defunct. The abolition of the TV license will be effective from April 2026 to allow the BBC time to adjust. Why should somebody watching, a live football game on Sky or something live on Amazon where BBC is irrelevant have to pay money to the BBC? It is anti-competitive. It stops other people being able to run their own live broadcasts who don't get free handouts from the government. It is antiquated, and so it will be abolished. Next, the ISA allowance will be reduced from £20,000 per year to £5,000 per year. Not just for cash ISAs, as some people were talking about recently, but all ISAs will be limited to £5,000 per person, and the reason is no normal regular person can actually make use of the £20,000 allowance. If you are a couple, your allowance today is £40,000, 20,000 each, and nobody on any normal salary can possibly actually use that allowance for saving money, whether it's in investments, in cash ISAs, and whatever. The £20,000 allowance only benefits very high income people who do not actually need this tax break. £5,000 is about £400 a month going into your ISAs per person, which is quite a lot for most people. And at the same time, capital gains personal allowance will then increase back up from £3,000 to £10,000. Also, capital gains on shares and private property up to a total of £100,000 per year will be taxed at just 10%. So that regular people who choose to invest their money and then make a profit from that do not have to be taxed a huge amount of money. It encourages people to invest. And the recent changes in capital gains rates will be cancelled. The standard rate of capital gains will go back to 20%, down from the recent increases to keep it competitive. The lower 10% rate of capital gains will encourage more people to invest their money, and this can help the economy grow substantially. Now, to help out with this, stamp duty on shares trading on the UK stock market will also be abolished. It is a really weird feature. A lot of people don't even know that it exists. There is a 0.5% fee for buying stocks that trade in the UK. If you buy US stocks, there is no fee. If you go and buy UK companies trading on the London Stock Exchange, you pay 0.5% stamp duty. Makes no sense. 0 cents. It discourages anyone from choosing to list in the UK. It raises about £3 billion a year, which is very, very low. It's like 0.2% of the total government budget. And this 0.2% is a blocker on people choosing to invest in UK companies, which funds the remaining 99.8% of the budget. So now the UK stock market can work on the same free terms as the United States or any other markets that is developed. I know Europe still has these. We're going to be better. We want to tell the world that the UK is open for business. And while we're on the subject of stamp duty on houses is also a problem. It is a problem because it stops people from moving. It reduces mobility. If you need to move for your job, for example, and you have to, sell your house that you've lived in for a while and you have to go and buy a new one, you lose out in a very big way because of stamp duty. If you work in London, buying even a small 3-bed terrace house will cost you a fortune and you will have to pay stamp duty. So stamp duty on consumer house purchases will be abolished with a cap of 1 property per household. Stamp duty on second houses or non-commercial property bought by companies or for non-UK tax residents will be taxed a 10% stamp duty with no 0% exception. So if you're not a regular person buying a house, if you're a company, if you're a foreign owner, whatever, you will have to fork out a 10% stamp duty charge with no exception. So if a company buys a house for £300,000, they have to pay £30,000 in stamp duty. If a person wants to buy a £300,000 house, and that's their only house, that's the one that they're going to live in, there is no stamp duty. This will make houses more affordable, especially as you need less money up front to go buy one. It means baby boomers who live in a big house with extra bedrooms that they don't need and they don't want to heat can downsize without the penalty of having to fork out stamp duty to do it. So it frees up the bigger houses for families who do need the space. It solves a lot of the housing issues we have, and it will stop the endless hoovering up of houses by buy-to-let landlords and foreign companies so that regular people can have a good chance of buying a house at a reasonable price. Next, business rates. These are currently punitive for small businesses, for shops, for startups where it really, really matters. If you want the economy to grow, you need people to start new companies. A guy setting up a business on their kitchen table, in their garage, whatever, can be the big tech giant in 20 years' time. That's how this stuff works. Big corporations don't really notice business rates as a cost. They are almost immaterial to them. But if you're a small startup, business rates will often be one of your biggest costs. And business rates make it very difficult for many people to get started. The idea here will be to combine the retail, hospitality, and leisure discount that is currently set up and the small business rate relief, but at the same time make the numbers actually work for real startups and scale-ups. So properties with a rateable value of up to £50,000 will incur no business rates if this is the only place where the company operates. Or if your business has 2 locations from which you work, you can get a 50% discount on the business rates in each of those, with a total cap of £50,000 being in place. You are not allowed to take advantage of this by breaking up your businesses into small entities. Closed businesses, related entities that try to abuse the system will be penalized appropriately. This is designed to help startups get going. This is designed to make it easy for people to start working their own thing if they want to go and do that. If you want to go and rent an office, go right ahead and you will not have to pay business rates to do it. Designated businesses will also get a 50% discount on business rates if they do not already qualify for the 0% rate. And these will be shops and restaurants and cafes on the high street. This discount does not apply to warehouses or other infrastructure. This is to encourage real shops, real restaurants and cafes that are consumer oriented to exist and to make it easier for them to trade. The next tax that we need to talk about is vehicle excise duty. Currently, it is way too complex and based mostly on emissions, only loosely based on car value from year 2 onwards, so the method changes. Most people currently pay around £220 to £270 in the first year for new cars and £190 from the second year onwards for a regular cheap runaround car. Electric cars are coming, but currently they are exempt. And this needs to normalize. It doesn't really make sense. So the new system for car tax will be based on the full purchase price of the brand new car, including all options and fees. In the first 5 years of owning the car, the tax will be less than £40,000 for the car, the tax is £250. Between £40,000 and £60,000, the tax is £500. Between £60,000 and £100,000, the tax is £1,000. And if you're wanting to spend over £100,000 on a car, the tax will be £5,000. And after 5 years, all cars will pay just £250 a year, irrespective of anything. This simplifies the system and it stops really stupid things happening, like having to pay huge VED on a 10 or 12-year-old car because it cost over £80,000 when it was brand new, even now it only costs £5,000 and actually costs you way more to repair it every year. It will stop people scrapping cars for no reason because the tax is too high. And the last tax that I want to cover is alcohol duty. The current system is unnecessarily complex and it proportionally taxes more expensive alcohol less. Taxing cheap alcohol, though, is also important to prevent people buying the cheapest possible alcohol with a max alcohol content, something that we want to discourage. So the new system will be as follows. Alcohol duty will be abolished and all alcohol will now be taxed at the 40% premium VAT rate. The minimum price will be set at £2.50 per litre on beer and cider, £6 for a bottle of wine and £15 for spirits. And the cheaper end of the scale, the very cheapest alcohol will become a little tiny bit more expensive as a result of doing this. But most regular wine and beer, like average price stuff, will be roughly the same. But it will also mean that more expensive premium alcohol, like expensive bottles of wine, expensive whiskey, things like that, will now pay considerably more in total tax and duty, which is actually a fairer and a better system. If somebody wants to go and buy that 100 bottle of wine or whatever, they will contribute a lot more to tax. Now, let's talk about growth. And first, let's talk about enterprise zones. First, all existing enterprise zones will be scrapped. Wow, no! Hear me out. If you don't know, at the moment, the way that the government identifies an enterprise zone is they say that to qualify, your company has to be based in this one specific building, on this one specific business park, in this one specific place. If that particular building does not work for your kind of business, it's not the place that you want to be based, if the rent is way too expensive, well, tough luck. You are not in an enterprise zone. The current system is basically a front for huge corruption potential with the owners of these very specific buildings on these very specific business parks. It is disgusting. The system smells so bad that the system just needs to be deleted. And a new system of launchpads will be created. First class of launchpad is Class U, U for universities. Businesses are encouraged to hire students from top universities while they are studying on a part-time basis. This gets students into cool jobs and focuses their attention on the future. It teaches them practical skills that apply in the real world, as well as the academic stuff that they learn in their courses. And any student getting a job while studying at a university will get a Class U exemption from income tax. The students will not pay any income tax at all for any part-time salary of up to £25,000. The work has to be carried out locally to the university and not remotely or in a completely different city, anything like that. Companies setting up and hiring students from these universities will get a rebate on business rates tax equivalent to 25% of the salary of the students being hired under Launchpad Class U. These jobs cannot be menial work, they cannot be manual work or work in retail and hospitality. So you cannot just go and stack shelves at a supermarket or work in a cafe and take advantage of the scheme. That is not what it is designed for. This income tax rebate will continue to apply at 50%, at half of the amount, on the tax due for 1 year after graduation, as long as you continue being employed by the same company that you were employed with while you were studying. So that students continue working for these companies afterwards and build those long-term working relationships. Universities get a new Launchpad Class U funding grant from the government per student that takes up a Launchpad placement. This will encourage universities to integrate the scheme into the educational curriculum, maybe even merge the two to some degree, maybe broaden the curriculum away from being purely theoretical to being much more applied, teaching the skills that these students need in the real world so they don't have to be taught again the moment they finish university. So in the sciences and computer science, for example, this would encourage a much more useful application of skills which can boost the economy. After graduation, any student on a Class U program will get access to new special Class U mortgages and a Class U car loan if they want to. The government will underwrite the risk for lenders offering these mortgages and loans. The risk of negative amortization on the mortgage will also be covered by the government, and rules on past income verification will be relaxed for this specific mortgage class for obvious reasons. On a car loan of up to £30,000, 50% of the risk will be covered by the government to the financial lender to enable the scheme to happen. And here is a big kicker. This also applies to students who set up their own companies. The idea here is to encourage startups and tech companies to come and start working with the smartest people in our universities while they're still at university, and then help them transition seamlessly into work. And at the end of the university, we do what we can to help the students transition into continuing this work. The students can go and sort themselves out with a place to live, with a car, a cheap car, and pay a bit less tax to get started. And then there will also be a second launchpad called Class M. M stands for manufacturing. There will be 13 new Launchpad Class M designations. Not a specific building on a specific business park run by somebody who is a mate of somebody in government, that is gone, but an 8-mile radius around the following initial 10 cities: Belfast, Bradford, Doncaster, Dundee, Glasgow, Hull, Middlesbrough, Newport, Scunthorpe, Sheffield, Stoke-on-Trent, Sunderland and Wrexham. These zones are some of the world's leading historical manufacturing locations. There is existing infrastructure there, there's rail, there's roads, there's ports, there's great connections, but many of these areas are also in decline. They have been in decline for a while, and we are suffering from higher unemployment in these areas while having high numbers of potentially good workforce for the manufacturing industry sitting idle. So here is what we're going to do. 1. Manufacturing class business premises like factories will get a 50% discount on business rates within these zones. Industrial areas meeting requirements on minimum number of manufacturing employees will also have childcare facilities on site, and 50% of the cost of providing these will be subsidized by the government. This is to encourage people with children into work in the most seamless and helpful manner possible. Local education schemes will be set up to train the staff necessary for the childcare provision at no cost to those who want to work in childcare and enroll in the scheme. 3. Governments will also offer manufacturers 0% loans to install large capacity battery deployments so that they can use power at much lower net rates and not have to shut down at peak usage times, which is what currently happens today with many manufacturing processes. It means factories can run 24/7 and pay less for electricity. Industrial manufacturing areas will have superfast fiber available for connection. It will be delivered to all the premises within 2 years. Apprentices, like students,
will pay no income tax for 1 year. This limit is per person, not per job, and then only 50% of income tax due in the second year. This will help with young people getting their first job, getting their first car, putting a deposit down on rent maybe, and this tax benefit will be capped on a total income of £40,000 so that it cannot be gained by high earners being classified as apprentices by their rich daddy. Companies that choose to take advantage and set up in a Class M launchpad will have one condition to get all of these benefits. They will need to stamp made in Middlesbrough, made in whichever other city that you want prominently on their products so that we market these Class M launchpads and promote British products worldwide. That is the only requirement. So you have to go and stamp made in Hull or made in Sheffield or whatever on your product so that we advertise this scheme to the whole world. And both launchpad classes will have an additional exemption on business rates for 5 years. If disused or dilapidated buildings in states of significant disrepair are taken up within these zones and used by these startups, so old mills, old derelict farm buildings, old derelict shacks, please go and talk to the farm owner and set up shop there, set up your business there, and you won't need to pay any business rates at all for 5 years. And here is an interesting perk. If your business is located within one of these launchpad zones and you are an active participant in a launchpad scheme, so you're getting some of these benefits and your turnover is less than £2 million, you can use the launchpad tax offset. You can use the sum of all the income taxes paid by your company employees and then the net VAT paid by your business, so input minus output VAT, and you can add the business rates as well and any other applicable taxes, and you can use them to offset your corporation tax. So that if you have a turnover of 1 million, for example, you're a startup that is doing quite well, and you have a net profit of £200,000, you employ 5 members of staff who pay combined £60,000 in tax per year, your business rates are £20,000 per year, for example, and your net VAT is another £10,000, well then £90,000 out of your £200,000 of net profit will not be subject to corporation tax because of the launchpad tax offset rule. So if you want to go and start a small business, the incentives really stack up, right? But that's not good enough. We want serious growth. So the UK will also set up a public investment bank. Weirdly, the UK is one of the only major economies in the world that does not already have a public investment bank. This new bank will exist to provide initial funding to startups. The money will be provided by the government, but also private investors will be allowed to pool their money in as well if they choose to, if they want to. The bank will assess business plans and assess the founders for different early stages of investment. And successful local business leaders will be encouraged to volunteer their time to do these assessments. There will be a multi-stage review process to avoid any abuse, cronyism, corruption, and stuff like that. And at the moment, the only way that you can get funding for your business as a young startup founder is by either having a rich daddy or knowing the right people. If you try and walk into a bank to apply for funding as a young founder, you will never ever get anything. You will be laughed at, guaranteed. If you aren't networking with the right people in London, if you are, I don't know, a regular ambitious guy without any connections in Bradford or in Nottingham or in Newcastle, you are not getting any funding for your business ever. That is the situation today. This is what discourages people from even trying. It's really hard to get going if you do not have the right connections and you are not made of money. And the Public Investment Bank will be there to change this. And while we're at it, I have to mention spending. Because one of the biggest problems with the way that the governments have managed money for a while now, is that everybody looks at the ways in which you can raise extra revenue through taxes. But very few people ever want to look at where that money is actually spent. Now, I don't think that you need to go and copy the way that other countries have gone about doing this, and I don't think it needs an immediate sledgehammer approach which throws the baby out with the bathwater, but we're also seeing recently the UK Foreign Office will spend money on things like the £25 million for green urban growth in Somalia. If you're wondering what this is, it is to support Somalia cities become more inclusive and resilient to cope with rapid urbanization and climate change and be able to harness green growth opportunities that contribute to poverty reduction and build longer-term resilience for Somalia's internally displaced people and the urban poor. And I don't think you have to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out that this is a word salad written by some consultants with a whole load of buzzwords buzzwords sprinkled in. It certainly does not feel like supporting Somalia's cities to become more inclusive should be a line item in the UK government spending when the economy is tanking and there is no money for critical services. Oh, and here is another one. Provision of electric vehicles to the British Embassy in Tirana. This one cost £500,000 and paid for the provision of 15 EVs to the British Embassy Tirana. The vehicles are to be donated to Albanian prisons. The electric vehicles will be used mainly around Tirana, with some long journeys to distant prisons in Albania. Moving to electric vehicles is part of the drive towards net zero and part of a wider greening initiative. The required vehicles should be delivered at once. This is not a joke. This is an actual government contract. They bought 15 brand new Porsches and donated them to the Albanian prison system to help with achieving net zero. And recent news has shown that 1 in 5 new cars sold in the UK are bought via the Motability Scheme. The Motability Scheme exists to allow people who have extra serious needs to be able to have more freedom so that they can go and get around, so they can have independence. And it is a great scheme in a society that cares about helping people in need. But when you get to a place where 20% of all new cars sold in the entire country are sold via this scheme, it is being abused and a huge amount of money is being wasted. I have a funny feeling that if we begin looking precisely at what money is being spent on, we might be able to cut a big chunk of the deficit out pretty quickly. We have one of the highest real tax burdens in the world, and yet, despite all of this tax, the government apparently does not have any money to spend on anything. Something is not right in this equation, and it needs fixing, instead of continuously increasing taxes to cover more and more wasteful spending. Next, let's talk about policy. And let's start with financial products. First order of the day is to ban the use of teasers of any kind on financial products. A teaser is the introductory rate to get you to take out the mortgage or the credit card or the whatever before it then switches to the much more expensive standard rate. The expectation from companies that provide it is that people switch because of this low rate teaser, and then they forget to switch, or they can't be bothered, or they're too busy, or life happens, or they're not eligible because their credit got worse, and then they start paying the much higher rate for a long period after the teaser ends. Banning teasers will mean that mortgages cannot have a specific rate available for the next 2, 3, or 5 years, and then have a rate which is 2 or 3 times as high after that, which often causes financial pain. The mortgage rate that you get has to be the same rate for the duration of the mortgage. Same with any other form of loan. Credit cards offering things like 0% for 12-month deals will also cease to exist because of this rule, because that's just a way to make people build unsustainable levels of debt by borrowing money over and over and over for free until they can't keep refinancing it, and then they start paying a whole boatload of interest. It's predatory and it's a bad system. So teasers of all kinds will be banned on financial products. Also, consumer financial products cannot have an upfront fee, no matter how that fee is disguised and what it's called. If you are a bank that offers a mortgage, you have to bake the fee, if you like, into the interest rate for the life of the mortgage. If you have a compulsory valuation that comes with the product, well, that is your problem. You have to integrate it. The customer should not have to go and do mental gymnastics and work out which mortgage is better and cheaper by comparing 10 different numbers and trying to work out all of the sums. If you are borrowing money, there should be a term over which you pay the money back and an interest rate associated with it. That's it. And then you can compare like for like. And the system is then clean and transparent and everything is equal. And to make it even better, the method for calculation of interest rates cannot arbitrarily change on debt products. At the moment, your bank can write you a letter saying, we're going to increase your interest rate because we feel like it, because you are now higher risk according to our models. This will become illegal. So a credit card cannot link your interest rate to the Bank of England base rate when that rate is sitting at near 0% and then benefit from interest rates increasing afterwards because your interest rate automatically goes up. And they cannot write to you after you've had a credit card for a year and tell you, well, you know what, we've decided that we're going to increase your interest rate from 16% to 30% so we can make more money. The agreed method of calculation of your interest has to be maintained for the duration of the customer life cycle, no exceptions. And while we're on the topic, credit products cannot charge over 50% interest, inclusive of any mandatory fees. No, that's it, the cap. If you have to charge more than 50% interest, then the product is just too expensive and it should not exist. policy. The payday loan industry is a legalized loan shark. They prey on people with little money. They charge them absolutely extreme levels of fees and interest. And that industry is actually counterproductive. It is not helping. It needs to be killed off. While we're talking about finance, the government will stop using the current CPI as the key measure of inflation and will start using a new version of CPIH, which also includes the cost of housing. CPIH will also have a major rework of weights, so that the weights reflect the median, not the mean person living in the UK. So for example, in the most recent data, the combined weight of rent and owner-occupier housing costs is 23%. Show me a family in the UK who pay just 23% of their post-tax income for their rent or mortgage. Like, real example. It is not reflective of reality. It is not reflective of how 95% of people live. Most people pay something like 40%. In London, it will be 60%. The reason the weight is so low is because it also includes pensioners. It includes people who own their houses outright. And that massively skews the overall number to make it not reflective of what real people on real incomes actually experience. The owner-occupier cost is going to be abolished and replaced with direct feeds from UK banks and building societies on how much people are actually paying for their mortgages. I completely do not understand why this wasn't already done like 20 years ago already. It's not rocket science. Let's use real data, actual data, to measure real inflation instead of making the numbers up. So CPIH will become the new CPI. If anyone still cares about the old CPI, we can rename it to the LPI, L being for Limited Price Index. And the method of calculation of the CPI, the new CPI, will scrap using the geometric mean, which is what's currently happening at the moment. The reason that the ONS uses the geometric mean to calculate CPI is because it makes the numbers look better for the government. The geometric mean is a method that is designed for things like calculating compounding effects, not finding the average of a set of numbers. We want inflation data to show what the actual real inflation on products is, so that it is transparent, it is honest, and it actually allows the government to make good decisions for people, not a fake artificial lower number that looks good. Next up, energy. Effective 1st of September, energy companies must stop charging wholesale electricity prices based on the marginal plant cost basis. This is a huge reason why energy is so expensive in the UK. At the moment, this means that when gas generators come on and the price of gas spikes, all electricity sold in this half-hourly window is charged at the rate of the gas for no particular reason, because the old system is set up that way. So if there are other methods of generating electricity that are also running that are cheaper, they still get to charge at the highest possible rate. The reason that the system is set up like this is because, well, computer says no. This is why some of the generation arms of the big energy companies are making obscene record-breaking profits. We just don't hear about it because it's obfuscated. We only hear about the profits of the consumer-facing side because the profits from those are passed on to the generation. This will be banned as a practice, and energy has to be bought by category or pool price instead. New legislation will be passed to prevent pools from gaming the pricing mechanism or intentionally taking action to increase price to match the higher cost of the marginal producers from other pools. This will dramatically reduce profits for energy companies. Any companies that want to exit the UK market as a result because they don't have the ability to profiteer anymore are free to do that. The condition is that they have to offer the government nationalisation as the primary option as part of that exit. But it will benefit consumers and businesses who are currently paying the highest energy prices in the world for no apparent reason. Drilling permits in the North Sea will be immediately restarted, and policies that expressly ban fossil fuels will be reversed. We should strive, absolutely 100%, for a fully green economy in the future, and we should put in place incentives to make it happen in the long run. But we should also not destroy our economy, force old people to not turn on their heating in the winter, and we should not shoot ourselves in the foot while chasing net zero. That might make lives of millions of people a misery. There is a balance to be had. For example, electric vehicles are very early doors still, but really They are better than petrol cars in every single way. They are cleaner, they are quieter, they are easier. You have full electrical power on tap for use. They are fully charged in the morning if you can charge them at home. At the moment, they have big downsides too. The range can be a problem. The charging infrastructure can be annoying. If you don't have your own driveway, that can be an issue. But in principle, electric cars are better. Energy storage from renewables is also very early. It will also take time. These all need to happen, and a new entity called UK Power will be established to make them happen. UK Power will immediately start building large capacity battery deployments. These will be able to charge during the night when nuclear and renewables are almost free, and then discharge during peak hours. These will be government owned. They will be funded via investment, and direct investment will be available to third parties if they want to, and subsequently they will generate the government revenue while reducing the requirement for peak electricity. Building these facilities will allow us to more than double our capacity for electricity consumption without actually needing to build any new electricity plants, because today's electricity production is limited by whatever the peak is, which is 6 o'clock, everyone comes home, turns on the kettle. That's the peak usage. If we are able to distribute that peak between the entire day, we can actually use a huge amount more electricity without needing to expand on the network. It's also a lot faster than building new electricity plants, and surprisingly, when you actually compare the full real all-in cost of building like a giant nuclear reactor, as we're seeing at the moment, it's pretty reasonable money too. People often think that switching to clean power is like quitting smoking. You have to have a hard quit and then work through the withdrawal symptoms, and then at some point after you will be clean. But it doesn't have to be that way. Withdrawal symptoms for the UK are an economy that is collapsing because energy prices are the highest in the world. When people switched from horse carriages to cars, people didn't just walk out onto the street and shoot all the horses and then wait decades before all of those horses were eventually replaced by cars. We need to fix the economy so that it is growing and then accelerate the switch on the back of doing that. Next up, the infrastructure monopoly ban. The UK is suffering from the privatization of monopolies that have no competition and therefore no need to improve their service, optimize their processes, or do anything to try to help their consumers. We all end up paying ridiculous prices that flow straight into the pockets of the owners of these monopolies. These monopolies exist to enrich their shareholders and executives. They pay themselves big dividends. And at the moment, pretty much every water company in the UK is on the brink of bankruptcy after paying those dividends, while pumping huge amounts of raw sewage into the rivers and our coastlines. And the UK is paying the highest energy prices in the world. This is absurd, and it has to stop immediately. Effective 1st of April, the following industries will be classified as effective monopolies with no meaningful competition. 1. Train companies. These will be fully integrated along with Network Rail. It is preposterous that regular train tickets in a small country frequently cost £200 or £300. It is dumb. If you take a step back, it is bonkers. You should not have to go to find weird websites, that let you break up your journey to take advantage of specific fares, or take the risk if your train is delayed because you won't be able to get on the right train. You should not be able to drive by yourself in a car across the country for much less money than taking the train. This is dumb, and clearly there is a huge waste in the system because it cannot actually cost more per passenger to take the train than to drive a car. It is far less efficient to drive the car. London to Edinburgh. Let's say I travel tomorrow, I come back 2 days later from a business trip. The cost for that is over £200. It's a 405-mile trip, so that's 810 miles return. At 40 miles per gallon, that's 20.25 gallons or 92 litres, and at £1.40 a litre, that's £129, almost half. And yeah, there will be some maintenance required on the car as well, but this is insane. This should not be happening. In most parts of the country, there is an absolute monopoly on train routes. There is one company and one company only that can take you from where you live to the next town. In my case, that is South East Rail, for example. These are completely unnatural monopolies. They weren't arrived at by the virtue of that company being really good at what they do. They were arrived at by privatizing things that should have never been privatized. There is zero incentive for those companies to improve the service for their customers because their customers have no choice. Gas and electricity supply and the national grid are also monopolies. Broadband and fire internet supply are also monopolies. Water supply and drainage companies are also monopolies. All of these companies will be nationalized because there is no meaningful way to control them via market forces, and we are seeing each of them spiral out of control. If you are the only train company allowed to operate on a route, you have no incentive to try and make the travel better. You have no incentive in trying to optimize your performance, and you will squeeze the customers for money as hard as you possibly can so that you can pay more money to your shareholders. Rail franchises will be nationalized when they run out. National Grid will go through compulsory nationalization. Openreach will also go through compulsory nationalization, and water companies will all be nationalized without taking on board any of the excessive debt and instruments that they have accrued while paying themselves dividends. These will all default, or the owners can deal with them whichever way they want otherwise, because the companies will become defunct. A forensic accounting investigation will be launched, and if it is found that these companies paid shareholders dividends that were completely unsustainable, which is illegal, or if the dividends came at the expense of being able to treat sewage, which they are committed to doing under charters, the people responsible will end up in prison. In all cases, the nationalization will be fast-tracked via emergency legislation. And talking of legislation, the Workers' Rights Bill will be cancelled. Hear me out on this one. This bill says that workers would be eligible for all employment benefits from day one, which makes hiring new people, especially by small businesses, much more difficult, much higher risk for employers, and it will tighten what is already a relatively frail employment market. It will make finding a job by people much harder. It's counterproductive. It will do the opposite of the intended purpose. What if you are a small business and you go and hire someone and they go on maternity leave on day 2 and you didn't even know that they were pregnant when you were hiring them? What if they go long-term sick immediately after you hire them and you cannot get rid of them because probation is not a thing anymore? Currently, all of these different things apply from different points in time in legislation. Parental leave, maternal leave, probation, blah, blah, blah. All of these employment rights will now align and become effective from 2 years after you start employment to encourage employers to hire people, especially small employers, without fearing the risk that the employee will not be working while costing the business a full salary and therefore making the whole business tank. And to make businesses up and down the country more effective, there has to be a big investment in infrastructure. So here is my initial list. The A1 will be expanded to be a full motorway with 2 or 3 lanes the entire way from London to Edinburgh. Currently, parts of the road are A road status and parts are narrow. The M4 Relief Road south of Newport will be built after 30 years of dallying around by various governments. The M30 motorway will be created to boost economy in the southwest, and the A303-A30 corridor that is not currently served by any motorway. The A9 Perth to Inverness will become a dual carriageway to connect northern Scotland and the Highlands. The Manchester metro area underground system will start construction, and the plan is to eventually merge it with Liverpool. The Transpennine train line will be expanded and built to modern high-speed standards along the Chester, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Hull route to connect the northern cities. The Lower Thames crossing will be accelerated to lift congestion at Dartford Tunnel and around the M25. Now, £800 million has already been spent on just planning a short part of this route. Almost £1 billion spent without anything being constructed or anything physical being done. It is almost inconceivable how these projects suck up money via consultants, via all kinds of weird third parties. This has to change immediately. It is not a good way to do things. Out of the many proposals for the Lower Thames crossing, the current plan will be cancelled, and the 2010 proposal will be revived. That will extend the Lower Thames crossing with a dual carriageway which will run parallel to the M25 north to connect directly to the M11. This would take all cross-channel freight and freight from the Sheerness and London Thamesport ports off the M25 and immediately adjacent motorways, and it will get products to the rest of the UK cheaper and faster. And now let's quickly turn to politics. Now, I know politics is not the remit of a budget, but seeing as I am just a random guy on YouTube, I am going to include a few changes here as well because, well, I can. First up, MPs should have no expenses for having constituency homes. MPs should not represent an area where they do not actually live. I know, who could have thought of that? My local MP does not live in the area, and it is complete waste of space having an MP that does not experience the issues of the place that they represent firsthand every day. She turns up for a photo op every now and then, and that's about it. That's about all of her involvement with the constituency. Which other jobs pay you £90,000 and your electricity bill on top and say, you don't even have to actually turn up to work? To solve the accommodation issue, the government will acquire a portfolio of apartments in London that can be used by MPs to stay in London so that they can attend Parliament, so they can do their jobs. They can be assigned one of these for as long as they need while they're working in Parliament, and this will be optional and available on request by MPs. If you want to buy your own home in London as an MP because you are rich, go right ahead. But the UK taxpayer is not going to buy that home for you. Also, 650 MPs is way too many for the size of this country. For example, the US has 435 in the House of Representatives, and the US has a population which is 5 times bigger than the UK and way more diverse geographically. The number of MPs is way too large, and that introduces an increased level of waste and corruption. Many MPs sitting on the backbenches have almost no meaningful input into what happens in Parliament. There are MPs where you look up their contributions in Parliament and there is almost nothing for years. It's a waste. The resources that are available to individual MPs also, as a result of there being so many, are limited, so that they have very poorly staffed little offices with limited ability to make real change locally. So let's cut down the number of MPs to 200, creating more effective local offices with the benefits of scale, and make those MPs actually relevant. And here is an unpopular opinion. MP salaries should increase significantly to attract top, highly qualified, smart people to these roles who would otherwise never choose to go into politics and just go into commercial positions. Currently, it is difficult to attract people to a job where the highest possible salary, if everything turns out perfectly, if all of your political campaigning works out, and you do eventually win that seat, you become an MP, the highest salary that you can earn is £90,000. And what if you get, and so as a result, is you get a mix of people who are often not very capable, and people who clearly enter politics not to make a real change, not to serve the people, but to make money from corruption or from speaking engagements and selling influence after they retire. MP salaries should increase to £300,000. Ministerial salaries to £500,000. This might attract actual economists, real ones, to do the work, not fake ones. And if you work out the numbers, it's an absolute drop in the ocean in terms of government spending. If that is how much regular private businesses are spending on having people run them, why are we not spending it as an entire country? At the same time, all second jobs and part-time work will be banned completely for MPs. If you are an MP, that is a full-time job. It is more than a full-time job. How can you possibly be a true representative of your people if you're also working 10 other jobs at the same time, writing for 10 different newspapers, running private companies, and you need to represent the interests of all of those other companies as well as the interests of the people that you represent. Lobbying and any form of corruption will be punished by severe prison sentences going forward. Like, giving your mates and your pub landlord a big government contract during a pandemic. That sort of thing should result in somebody being in prison for a very long time. Zero tolerance policy. Also, there are 24 ministerial departments in the UK. There are 20 non-ministerial departments, 19 public corporations, 423 agencies and public bodies that have a quasi-governmental status, and 117 entities called high-profile groups, essentially also part of the UK government. There are also up to 109 different kinds of government ministers in the size of the country that we are. 109. There are 22 cabinet ministers, there's ministers of state, various secretaries and junior ministers. This is way, way, way too many people, too many bosses and too many organizations, and way too much bureaucracy and overlap. There is a need for a complete restructure to eliminate duplication of roles and removal of unnecessary split of responsibility and ownership. Many of these government quangos have to go. There is no need for a government that has an insane number of ministers. It's just not effective. How do you actually hold a meeting that is useful and productive and effective when you have 25 or 50 or 109 people in that meeting? So to start with, let's eliminate and simplify the departments. For example, the Attorney General Office, the Justice Department, and the Home Office, they just become Justice Department because that's what they all do. We need to stop posturing and adding pointless names. For example, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero should just be called the Department for Energy because that is what it is. And every single government financial contract will now have to be published on a centralized system, no matter how big or small. You should not have to submit freedom of information requests to find this stuff out. It should be transparent, immediately available, and it should be very easy to access. There is already a system for some of the big contracts awarded, but I think it would be pretty useful to know where the money is going from the public purse all the way down. Every single contract, central government and local government, the precise dates on which the contracts were agreed, the names of the people who signed them off, and the dates on which the service or products will be provided, and the dates on which payments will be made against those contracts. Every single payment against these contracts should then also be recorded in the same public database available immediately to anyone on payment processing. The moment that the payment goes out, it should be visible. You should be able to log into the system and see precisely where the money is going. You should be able to go and check every single one of today's payments, where they've gone precisely. If your company does not want the public to know exactly how much you are charging the government, well, maybe you shouldn't be charging the government that much. Maybe the contracts that you hold should be, revisited. Every public tender or supply request will also have to have every bid published. The name of the bidder, the cost of the contract, and a summary of the specific differences, if any, in the supply provision. Every contract that is awarded will be linked to that specific tender so that anyone can go and look at what other options were on the table or whether there was no bidding at all. If you're a company that provides services, you can go and find out where you can go and bid for a service, and you can see exactly how much is being currently charged by somebody else. And if there is cronyism, you can go and offer your services for much better value. This will overnight destroy and cut insane heaps of waste in the system and the corruption that nobody wants to publicly talk about. Once you can see exactly where the money is going, there will be nowhere to hide. And if there is nothing to hide, why would you not want to have this system? While we're at it, all local council infrastructure will be centralized into a single system to prevent the huge, ridiculous amount of waste in duplication of work and cost. Currently, every local authority has its own systems, sometimes its own payment process systems, although recently some of those have moved to the Gov website. Every authority has their own systems for managing waste collection, managing payroll, etc., etc., etc. The logging in system for business rates in my local council where I live has been broken for the last 3 years. And nobody gives a shit, and nobody's fixed it. There will be a new government agency called GovTech. It will provide all of these services to local authorities, to government entities. This agency will build and provide centralized tech for public bodies. It is really not rocket science, and there is no need to outsource this to very expensive consultants and third parties. We can just do it internally. This can be set up in the next 12 months, effective April 2026. And last but not least, the non-dom status in the UK will be fully abolished. I actually agree with the government on this one, but I would take it a step further with a complete scrap. No weird intermediate steps. It is an antiquated load of bullshit to pander to the super rich, people like Rishi Sunak's wife. These super rich are just hiding their assets abroad from tax. That's what the non-dom status allows. It's a legal tax avoidance system. It does nothing for regular people. It achieves nothing for the UK other than letting rich foreign people avoid paying tax. They are not here creating jobs or creating growth because they're just sheltering their wealth. If they use the wealth to create companies and create jobs, they would then have to pay tax. And they obviously don't want to pay tax. That's the whole point of why they're sheltering it. So non-nom people will have their status cancelled. They are free to pay tax like everybody else using the same exact rules and systems, or they can choose to leave. And that is it for my emergency budget. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think, what you agree and disagree with. Sorry this one took a little bit of time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.